Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Back with me, Zaki, in the same course, Quantitative Content Analysis. This is the fourth session that actually the second part of our method block on content analysis. As in our previous meeting, we have talked about and discussed on mostly on the definition of content analysis, or I would prefer to call it quantitative content analysis in full. And then beyond the definition, we have also seen the main basic principle toward the technique of doing it, because doing content analysis is the main aim of this course. I mean, in this block, because in any type of method, we are going to do the method rather than just knowing the basic principle, the definition, and the step by step. So we will learn from trying the technique, the method itself, and then we also going to reflect on what we can learn from there, what we can reflect, which one is working, which one is not working, and also we are going to learn the reflective aspect of what is actually the benefit of this type of method, as well as the limitation. All right, in this session, especially on this part of the lecture, I would pretty much about focusing more about this step by step of content analysis. So it's basically preparing you in working with the group. As we have seen from last week, that this is the main step by step of content analysis. As I have mentioned earlier, content analysis is one type of the established method in our field, media and communication, that is already have this kind of more established principle, established technique, as well as an established form of step by step. Why? Because we cannot forget that this is also part of the approach called quantitative approach. Then, of course, it sees the idea of research from the positivism point of view of paradigm. Yeah. As any other quantitative research method, you can also actually follow that main principle and step by step. That's also the main reasons why this content analysis also already have quite an established and quite a strict. Remember the three keywords from the definition. It has to be providing a descriptive or providing description in a systematic way, objective way, and quantitative way. So these three words, and all of these three have to be done toward the manifest, the data that is actually manifest, something that is obvious from the material, not something that rely on our own perception, others' perception, or interpretation. So basically, this 5 step by step, it's the one that you are going to do together with your group. Firstly, by choosing a topic or focus of analysis, which is actually the main idea of what you're going to do. Like, are you going to investigate about violence in a particular TV show or a TV commercial, for example, or you are going to do reflective representation on particular ethnic groups, that kind of a topic. But topic is not enough, because topic needs to be followed by a specific research question. This is your main aim, why you are going to do this topic, because you have a specific research question. So you have to make one, at least in this group, you don't need to make a complicated research question, just make one research question. Of course, as a research question, it's supposed to be in the form of question. This one is more the analytical question. It's not something that, oh, what is this, what is that? No, it's a research question. So it's something that is actually giving you a sense of what kind of elements, concept, term, variables that you want to relate one to another. So research question can be about aspect of what, of course, or it can be aspect about how, or sometimes it's also about why. But content analysis, it's something that you either deal with what and how most of the time. Of course, you can ask why, but most of the set of the data won't give you pretty much answer on the aspect of why, because why need uh, an information beyond simply the media content sometimes. So I suggest you to focus on the aspect of what and how in your focus of analysis, of course. And then don't forget, from the topic research question, you also need to formulate your general initial assumption, or this is what we call hypothesis. In hypothesis, of course, you can mention your opinion and your position, because that's the main thing in hypothesis. Let's say you're going to talk about the reflective representation of an ethnic group in a particular media content, and then you already formulate your research question. Because remember, this is a quantitative. The question, it needs to ask about frequency, and then you ask about to what extent this X ethnic group, for example, being represented in the series of TV show Y, something like that. And then your hypothesis said, for example, that these TV shows in this period, in this particular period, giving a limited room for particular ethnic groups to be represented, because they mainly focus on the majority of society or something like that. That's hypothesis. Of course, it doesn't matter. Let's say by the end of your analytical process, or after the step 5, and then you finish that, and then your hypothesis is actually you didn't make it. I mean, like, your result is actually show a different result from your hypothesis, which is fine. That's the idea of this quantitative. You go from the deductive process, from the top to down, from the general to specific. That's the idea. But you need this general initial assumption in the beginning that actually lead your process. Okay, we move to the second step. It's basically dealing with your data. And then you decide your population or the universe of data, which is actually the main source in this situation of the content analysis. Of course, it's about which media, which data of part of your media. Of course, it's going to be very big, and then you need to limit yourself based on your focus of analysis into samples. How many, how far, it really depends on your research question on a hypothesis. There are no strict rules. It has to be this month, this period, these days, these numbers, these hundreds of examples. No, it really depends on either on your topic as well as on the type of your media. If your media data are really complex elements, there are, for example, there are written material, there are visual, there are audio, then you need for limiting that kind of type of data into a very more specific. But if, let's say, if you're focusing only on for example, on press release, and then you already have the focus, and press release is only 1 page each, and then you can have quite a lengthy period, but with a more samples, something like that. Then defining the unit of analysis. I'm going to give you more example of how to go into the unit analysis from our sample into a detail later on. Let's move on to the third step, creating the operational definition. This is a definition not by any reference, not by any third-party reference. This is your definition in terms of, if you choose the term reflective representation of ethnic minorities, what do you mean by ethnic minorities in this analysis? If you choose violence, what do you mean by violence? If you choose Verbal violence. What do you mean by verbal violence? It has to be defined in a very operational way, not in the kind of like a thinking abstract way. Not in, yeah, like this is not a definition of abstract thinking, but more about operational. Verbal violence in this analysis will be seen from the expression of word that shows anger, frustration, and also judging other people, something like that. Okay. And then number 4, in the previous lecture, I mentioned also in general that the step-by-step before we can do coding is doing the piloting. Well, for this particular assignment, you don't necessarily have to do that because it's kind of like a relatively small project, limited time. But I want to say that you can skip this piloting because even though, let's say, next time in the future, you work in the company, you work as a consultant in the media or anywhere, and then you have to do content analysis for your own work, for your own company. And it's very common to do the content analysis to provide any information to our own company and so on. And then it's usually been done in a group, and then you need quite a large number of team and fellow member of team, and then you need to provide a very standardized way. So that's why piloting is important, to check out whether our design will be working on or it will lead to a very not so reliable. Piloting is actually dealing with the aspect of reliability. But in this assignment and training, you can skip that part and you can just do the next step, the coding, which is basically defining categories. From your unit analysis, you define category. Verbal violence, for example, there are 3 or 4 categories that you want to see from your data, A, B, C, and then you put any kind of a let's say written expression from your data, and then you put into your coding sheet, and usually it's in the form of spreadsheet. You can use the software, of course, the standard Google Sheet or Microsoft Excel, or even you want to use the sophisticated or you want to use the online based or web based, any kind of spreadsheet, as long as you can create a table, and then you can calculate the result by looking at the frequency. That's what I mean by calculating the result. And then at the end, you can write the result. But in this assignment, again, you don't necessarily have to write a research report from the beginning until the end in a exhaustive, extensive way. No, what I expect after you finish the coding sheet, you create the result by making the visualization in chart, and then formulating. Of course, you need a 2 or 3 paragraph maximum of the brief analytical conclusion. And usually this conclusion is actually related to your hypothesis, whether you really address that, whether you answer that, or whether it's actually in a different aspect of it. All right, let's see this step by step into more concrete aspect. First, how you're going to do that in a group by having quite enough guidance. So I have provided, along with this recorded lecture, several literature. First one is dealing with the basic principle and basic technique, and these 2 files have been uploaded earlier on. First one is a book excerpt, a chapter from Arthur Asaberger, Quantitative Content Analysis, and the second one written in Bahasa Indonesia on Analysis Isi by Wisnu Marta Adiputra. Hopefully, both literature will give you a more detailed sense of the basic principle, which part that you need to do, which part that is actually not your intention. Be careful with that, because of course content analysis also have limitations. So when you formulate research question, for example, you cannot ask something that you cannot address by this particular type of method, like the one that I just mentioned earlier, that you cannot ask something that is based on human perception or anything. It has to be based on the data. And then I just want to stress out too, apart from anything that I already mentioned earlier or last week, that basically what we do with content analysis is actually dealing with two key words. One, it's data. Everything that we see from the media, everything that we chose from the samples, everything that we are going to calculate, we see it as the data. Here, it's the data that can be quantified, and then from the quantification, we can develop our argument. So everything is data, data, data. This is the one that leads to the principle of objective. So even though you have, let's say, a visual material combination with the written material, you need to transform that into your quantified data. How to do that? The step-by-step will help you on doing that, including how you, let's say, calculate the speeds from saying A, B, C into something that is actually numbers. And then, but then comes the second keyword. This also have been explained many times by Berger in this chapter, that the main aim of dealing with this data or such a data is actually because content analysis counting. Yes, it's counting, but counting on what? Counting on frequency. So it's about a level. Frequency can be achieved either by first making a comparison. So you compare from one set of data, either let's say it's about periodization. So from 2000, or let's say, I don't want to give a sense of a large set of it. Let's say in a more simple way, the set of data of comparison from September and October, something like that. So you're going to do on the sample of media A, but then you choose the set of data, anything that come from September and October, and then you compare. Then you check the frequency. Apart from the difference of period, comparison is also can be the different media. Maybe it's the same period of September, but media A, and then compare with media B. So that kind of frequency that you need to address. Does it has to be comparative kind of analytical work? Not necessarily. Sometimes it's not always about comparison, but mainly it can be also about process. As long as you have something to give you a sense of or a hint on counting frequency. Frequency deals with the level of something from to, kind of thing. And then you just need to decide whether the from or to it's about time, or is it about different elements of data. So it can be between A and B, something like that. Okay, so that's the main aim of this literature. Additional literature is also mainly giving you a hint about example of content analysis. So how this kind of technique and method, if we apply it into a specific case. And then in the first two, 35C and 35D, specifically about example of the report on doing content analysis. 35C and 35D, are also written in Bahasa Indonesia. It's actually part of a big project on analyzing two program. One is on the radio program, the other one is on a TV show. But what I want you to pay attention on this example, it's about the way in which they divide the issue into categories. Bear with me that this example is actually based on a large project. So they have large sets of data. You don't necessarily have to do exactly like this report. It just give you an example. Of course, you will do with a more limited set of data. You don't necessarily have to expand into this exhaustive. I just want you to give a sense that how they can say this based on their data and how they present the data. So 35C and 35D, it's about how to present the data. And then in Wimmer and Dominic, it's about how to set your technique. So it's before presenting the data. And some of them is actually about making the unit of analysis, coding, and so on. And I will show you later on. And then in the other example from F, T, H, I, and J, it's about a detail about what is operational definition and how you can create unit of analysis from your own sample. And then the principle on coding, what we have to pay attention on, and then also example on coding sheet and example of chart. Let's see a few of them. In this book, the one of the excerpt that I also share with you, it's actually about example and how you can create a topic, decide the universe or the population, and then from there you can create a sample and unit of analysis. You can see the pattern. Just pay attention on the pattern. Of course, you can change into your own material. Billing and Eastman, for example, in 2003, that's the name of the researchers over there. Sorry, number one. And then they focus on looking at the, let me check, gender, ethnicity, and nationalism in TV coverage of 2002 Olympics. And then they choose a particular population of the TV coverage from one TV network, NCB, and then they decide to sample 52 hours of NBC primetime coverage of how they are going to do with these 52 hours of recording of the TV report on a particular event, Olympic 2002. They actually just focus on adjectival descriptor and descriptive phrase applied to individual athletes. So they only focus on the word being spoken that refers how they call, how they refers to individual athlete, because they are going to focus on gender, ethnicity, and nationalism. Of course, within their own project, they need to define operationally what they mean by gender, what they mean by ethnicity, what they mean by nationalism in this particular project, as well as what they mean by descriptive phrase, and so on and so on. And then in you can check in the other example here from this table, you can see the pattern, right? The more it goes to the right column until unit of analysis, it's going into more limited ideas and even limited operational aspect. So that's exactly what you're going to do, from a very big macro thing into more micro and more operational. You can decide from there. And then when it comes to coding and making the coding sheet, here Gillian Rose from the book of Visual Methodologies, even when she focusing on the visual material, even for her, it's also interesting that any kind of visual material, especially in the digital media world nowadays, it really come with the written material. So you cannot ignore the importance of this. And then when you make a coding, if you really deal with the visual material and then you realize that there are also any additional written material along with this image, visual image, I mean, Gillian Rose also reminds us that we need to pay attention there in the coding. We need to include that. So that's why my suggestion in the beginning of this method block is actually that it's better to focus on something that is actually mainly written for this particular assignment to make it easier when you make a coding or when you create a category of your material. So when you create that and then you put that in your table, let's say you have 3 aspects, and then in each aspect that will be 3 elements that you are going to find and code from the word into numbers. 1, 2, 3. How many? Because we talk about frequency, right? So that's the idea. So of coding, and then to provide us with the coding process, we need the form or coding sheet. All right, this is just one example. You don't have to make something exactly like this. Of course, it have to be based on your own topic and your own character of the media. This is just a coding sheet. Let's say, imagine yourself as the researcher. They're going to do about character description in one particular TV cartoon. And then they need to put let's say they have 10 TV cartoon, and then they in each TV cartoon they want to check the character number, the character name, and then the role, and then they make a note whether the role is major, minor, and so on, and then whether the character is human, animal, and then they make a note. Then they move these notes from this coding sheet into their own spreadsheet table. And then at the end, all 10 TV cartoon will become into this big table, and then they can see that, let's say, all the 10 TV cartoon, they always have a main character as an animal. So none of them are actually human character. And then none of them is actually having a female leading character. It's always male. Maybe they want to focus on a gender representative, and then they can create a conclusion based on their chart and analytical. More than 85% of their leading character is actually only show male character. So is that have the very limited room and or space to show female leading character. They are biased in this, something like that, or the age or anything. So this is just an example. You need to create a kind of category A, B, C, D, and so on. It's the category here. So that's what I mean by category. And then when you put the category into your coding, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on in its letter, there's actually the one that you are going to change into the number. Let's say you find a character, okay, the species is animal, and then you put in your table animal. And then at the end of the whole unit of analysis, you can calculate, or it's actually automatic if you use a software like a standardized spreadsheet. From that material, then you can create the result. You cannot say anything beyond the result. That's the character of content analysis. For example, from this chart, the researchers are focusing on the representation of Westerner and non-Western from the visualization of the photograph, and also a report in the magazine called National Geographic. I assume every one of you knows the National Geographic magazine. It's one of the global magazine based in the US. And then they talk about cultures, humans, and geography in the rest of the world. But then these researchers pay attention on this kind of differences between how people being represented, even though this is a global magazine, do they really global? So that's their main research question. And then they come up with this chart, and then another chart to show how actually there are difference between the character of Latin American, African, and Middle Eastern group of people that is actually being reported in this magazine, right? Of course, the type of the chart, it's not necessarily have to be like this. This is just an example. Creatively, you can choose any kind of type of chart. Remember in the previous example, the one that is written in Bahasa Indonesia from Pujirianto, they use the pie chart. So it doesn't matter about the form of the chart. It's part of your creativity. The main important thing that it has to be based on your coding sheet, how you find the frequency of your data. From there, you can build the result. So for this particular assignment, you need to visualize your data into this kind of chart. You don't necessarily have to write extensively from the beginning until the process. You just do the process step by step and then do this. And then you conclude by giving us 2 or maximum 3 paragraphs about what is actually saying, how it actually relate to your own research question and your hypothesis, whether your hypothesis is being confirmed by this finding, or whether the hypothesis and your research question is actually addressed by looking at a completely different angle that actually the data say different thing. So that's the kind of analytical conclusion that you need to write in a very brief way. So that actually the main point of this group assignment. as part of our first assignment in this method block. Well, actually, each method block only have one assignment, but this time you're going to work together in a group. So I think that will be all for now. Hopefully, all the literature provide really good guideline for you. But should you have any question or you want to consult your ongoing or your progress, feel free to consult me by texting in our WhatsApp group, not individual WhatsApp. That's use our group. Or if you want really to say specifically about your progress in your group to me, just send it to my email and I will more than happy to respond it. All right. So keep working together with your fellow members in the groups. Keep discussing, keep making a decision together, and then sharing the role. And then before you going to create a analytical point of view or findings, something like that. And then after this, we're going to meet online again in a synchronous session next week in our regular schedule. So, but before that, make sure you already make an ongoing process and everything that is already in progress. Just share it with me during our next synchronous session in the fifth session, still in this block. All right, but before that, make sure you can access, download, and read all the guideline and share it with the group to share your understanding and then apply to your own chosen data. That will be all for me. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.